Deborah Murphy here. We're at the Canadian Beef Industry Conference, and I'm joined by Dr. Jody Carrington, who's a psychologist and author. Hello, Dr. Carrington, and welcome to my dungeon.
Hello, thank you for having me in your dungeon.
Yeah, we found a quiet spot, so that's kind of important. You spoke this morning. You're the keynote presenter here, and at the end of your presentation, you got a standing ovation.
Yeah, I asked them to do that though, so let's just preface that because the center message this morning was when you're acknowledged, you rise. And so at the end, when they first clapped, there was no rising, so I just sort of pointed that out. And then the second time that they got to sort of like clap again is when they were cued, they rose. You see? You're good listeners.
How did you feel about that?
Oh, well, it was maybe a little fake, but I still felt good.
So you were talking a lot about connection, emotional regulation and dysregulation. There was a lot of laughter in the audience. Why do you think it resonated so much?
You know what? I think that emotional regulation is a human experience. And I think in agriculture or in any other industry, we serve best, we lead best, we love best when we understand the importance of connection. We will never automate human connection. And oftentimes, the more disconnected we become, the more ill we become. And I think, what we talked about today is the heart of emotional regulation is looking and seeing. And we come from an industry. I grew up in a small town and I, grew up in ag, and I really understand that I think some of those very fundamental lessons that I learned early, right? That you can seal a deal on a handshake. That when somebody is sad or hurting, you just show up, even if you don't have any idea what you're going to say, you just go. That is the fundamental thing that we need to get back to the most, because expedited by COVID over the last couple of years, we've really been provided with so many opportunities to not connect, to look away. And what I was talking about today was, it's remarkable to me, despite the fact that we're biologically wired for connection. If you disconnect from an infant, they die, for example. The hardest thing we will ever do is look into the eyes of the people we love. And just 2 generations ago, how many of us were raised were in smaller houses around a kitchen table. And now, in 2 generations, our operations are huge. Our kids are busy. We have them in many activities. Our houses are bigger. And we do less of that connection on purpose.
Because it's hard.
Because it's hard, and we have so many exit ramps. Wow. My grandparents would play 3 games of crib every night. Yeah? What happens when you play cards with somebody? You fight, right? You look at each other. You have to engage, right? And now we have so many more, Netflix and TV, and we're going to catch up on the news, and we're going to look at our phones or our iPads or doing all of those things that we feel we stay connected to the world around, and what we get most disconnected at is the people that we live with.
So how do we stop that? If it's so easy for us to turn on our Netflix and so hard for us to look at our loved ones in the eyes, what do we do?
This is what I loved about speaking at this conference today, because we all know what to do, particularly those who are raised in a rural environment get it more than anybody, because we're not even 1 generation out around really how easy it is to gather your family, that when somebody dies, you show up. When things happen, you come together. We have a script for that. Many people don't. If I look at, I've lived in, I was at the Alberta Children's Hospital for 10 years where I worked on a psychiatric inpatient unit, and many times people wouldn't know their neighbors. They would come in and their support system was really isolated because they didn't have a lot of people in their communities. And so many of us work in this industry, have multiple generations of people who have worked in the same space, right? When you walk out today and hear, you know of most everybody or who they're related to, or is that guy's kid? Or, oh yeah, he's the asshole that used to. We know the stories, huh? And that's what really matters when the big things come. And that will never change. And our only job is to remember that and do more of it. So when you say, what do we do about it? We do more of what we know to be true. Don't underestimate your power of buying coffee for the guy in the line at Tim Hortons behind you. Or walking up to somebody in the hockey rink and saying, your kid is pretty awesome. I watched a shot out there. Or stopping by and saying, hey, jump in the truck. Let's go take a look at those cows. I want to see what you've been doing with this herd, right? We would do that more often historically. And now, given the exit ramps, we stop, we text, we just, you know what, well, I don't know, it's fine, we're good. Today's talk was really about just a reminder that I never, ever want us to underestimate the power of a compliment. of a wave, of a light up, of a showing genuine interest. And I was talking about one of my favorite hockey coaches' line today. He said, "You should see how fast I can get a kid to skate when I know the name of his dog." And I think about that all the time because I coach minor hockey. It's the thing that I love to do the most in our communities, not because I'm good at hockey, not because any kid's going to make the bigs, right? 0.07% of kids will go on to play in any professional league. Why kids show up to organize sport is to be seen. And when we can do that in dressing rooms and when we can stop conversations where kids are being, hey, look at me, no, let's try that again, right? When we can look and see, that's when the next generation is going to be kind and engaged and understanding and inclusive. Wow.
And you talked about that in your book, Kids These Days. You mentioned as a kid, I think, in hockey, that when you were first starting coaching, that always wanted your attention, and it was kind of a nuisance almost. But what did you do to help that child and also to help yourself go along?
Well, I think it's I think about this line, and I think it was in Kids These Days, but I said, we often call kids or people attention seeking, and if you change that word, just a simple word change to that person or that kid is connection seeking, it changes the way we show up a little bit, right? Because we've been raised in this generation where kids should be seen and not heard. And we love it best when people are calm, when they're using their words, when they're not losing their friggin' minds. Those are the kind of people we want to be around. And when somebody is losing their friggin' minds, we want to fix it, right? Fast, enough, shut up, calm down, relax. And we lose the ability to just look and see. Here's the 3 words that really allow me to help anybody regulate emotion. If they're losing their minds, if they're coming at me because their kid didn't get, they got benched, or they didn't understand how I ran this ration, or they did, whatever the deal is. These are the 3 words save me every time. Ready? Tell me more. And oftentimes when I ask that question, I don't want to know more. Okay? I don't give a shit that you didn't, get the shift you wanted, or you are here 2 hours later, or, whatever your problem is, nobody got you the staples you needed for your whatever, or my kid is sad because we can't go to the hockey game tonight, or this friend didn't call him back, or his Minecraft time ran out, or whatever the deal is, right? I want to fix it typically. You're fine. It's okay. Come on. Don't be such a baby. Smarten up. Do we have to complain about this all the time? Every time you come home, if you don't like feeding cows, then let's fucking sell them. Anyway, but when we do those things, we want to fix it because particularly with the people we love, we don't want them to be hurting. We don't want them to be distressed. But if you think about going on your second date with somebody, you are very engaged. If I think about my personal cow feeding husband on the first date, I was so interested in what he showed cattle around the world. He was amazing. He's like, do you want to come check cows? Do I? I need my own Carhartts. I'm in it. You want me to put I'll pull that. Look out. Now, are you kidding me? Are you kidding? I am not getting
a Netflix show to get to.
I am not getting up at 3 a.m. You do not need me to come with you. But I think it's this idea that when we are regulated, we have access to all the best parts of ourselves. And the more overwhelmed and distressed we get, the more you mean to me, the more dysregulated I get quicker, because I don't want you to hurt. I don't want you to be exhausted. I don't want you to be tired, because if you're not okay, I'm not okay. So I lose my capacity to just sink into emotion, and I try to fix it so much. How about you do this, okay? Sell them then. Or did you eat today? Go for a run, okay? Or we try to fix it, right? Mm-hmm. Instead of holding space for that little bit of emotional regulation. So the key to that for me are those 3 words. Tell me more. And then sometimes you get that deep breath, which is the key to regulation. If I can get anybody to take a deep breath, I know I'm getting them back on track. Their prefrontal cortex in their brain settles down, which is exactly what you want, because that's where all the best parts of your partner or your husband or your wife or your grandpa lives, is when they take that deep breath.
At that moment, we're just there with them, and maybe later we can do the problem solving that we so wanted to do in that moment.
Oh my God, that is such a good point. Because people are like, okay, what are we supposed to do? Just go breathe with everybody and tell them they're amazing shit? No. 2-step process. Collect, and then you direct. Be kind, and don't tolerate bullshit in that order. But we come from a generation, this is why this is so hard for so many of us, because we're really shifting because of the disconnect that has been inserted into the last two generations. We have to operate our way around seeing people first because we lived closer together. Our great-grandparents, statistically speaking, looked at their children 72% more of the time than we look at ours. So when they stepped into a conversation, when they had a meeting, when they went to church, their proverbial buckets were already filled because they had done a lot of that already. Now when you step into a bull sale or church or anywhere, typically we come pretty empty. And we come to those places to get work. Call in bunks at 5 a.m. I'm not full because I've never been looked at, hugged, got my hand shaken for a while. And so part of our job, if we really want to run successful organizations, is to understand this shift of be kind and don't tolerate bullshit in that order. Not, you earn my respect and then I'll be nice. That would be nice, and I know that makes sense to me. I get all of that, but we've never been this disconnected.
You kind of mentioned in your presentation and in your book that with babies, everybody wants to connect. Mm-hmm. And if there's crying, we want to connect and help the baby through that. We would never tell a baby, stop crying. Or maybe we would, but that's because we're dysregulated, right?
Sure.
But we don't do that with adults. Why is it that, or even kids, why all of a sudden do we just say, calm down? Feel better?
Two things, right? So when we know that people don't have an emotional language or when they can't talk, we know it's our job to sort of walk them home, okay? So Ram Dass said this quote, which I really loved, and I talked about it today, we're all just here walking each other home. We were never meant to do any of this alone. And we know if we disconnect from infants, they die. Biologically, we understand that as a human species, regardless of age, race, religion, socioeconomic status, or gender identity. We understand that if we disconnect from babies, they die, okay? Because they're helpless, huh? The more you get language, the more you tend to piss me off, the more you tend to sort of dysregulate me. We expect you at 15 to be able to get your shit together. We expect you as my partner to not be exhausted. If I'm going to hire you for your job, I don't really care about, But the truth of the matter is, I'm not going to get the best out of anybody unless they're regulated. And I'm not going to be able to give the best unless I'm regulated. So how do we really call into knowing that our biggest job sometimes is to connect and then direct? And again, I think the things that really matter to me is, some other things that really allow me to do this. What's the hardest part? What am I missing? Tell me more. What happened next? Any of those things really are helpful. But again, the more you mean to me or the more I feel like you are not serving or doing your job, I want to fix it. I want to get those things. And we need to get to the fix. This isn't a question. This is only about how do we expand that phase, that moment, that time in between understanding there's something wrong and getting to the solution. It is the holding space of the emotion so you can regulate first. If you come in and you're hot and you're mad and you're like, this is ridiculous, I'm not doing this, you just gave me 6 more feed lots to look after, and I'm mad at you, and you're like, listen, this is your job. If you want to work somewhere else, you fucking go somewhere else, right? Versus, okay, come here. Let's get a cup of coffee. What's going on? Tell me more. Well, I'm sorry. I don't know if I can work any harder, right? I'm home late every night. My wife's getting pissed off. I love this job. I just don't think I have enough time. Oh, okay. Well, let's figure that out, right? Do you understand? It's this idea of that collecting in the middle that really is so critically important. And the more disconnected we become, the more dysregulated people, generally speaking, are. And the pandemic has added that exponentially. Right? Uncertainty, fear, no end in sight is when I am so dysregulated. If I think about kids I've apprehended, people I've sat with in prison, uncertainty, fear, no end in sight means that's where I'm the most tense and dysregulated. And today we were talking about what are the 3 components of a global pandemic? Uncertainty, fear, and no end in sight. So for 2 years, almost 2.5 years now, as a globe, we have been in a heightened state of arousal, a place of emotional dysregulation. And the truth is, we've seen divorce increase by 33%. We've seen domestic violence. We've seen child maltreatment. Death by suicide and mental health related issues, including addiction, has increased in central Alberta, for example, by 700% since the beginning of the pandemic. So people ask me all the time, can we just get back to normal? There's really been it's fine, we're good. We're not. And you can't address what you don't acknowledge. And part of our job is the people who are working for us are in this position, our families are in this position, the teachers of our kids are in this position, and our only job is to become aware of it so we understand that the chippiness isn't about, people are turning into assholes. We have the power to slow it down. And those of us with a rural root get that when you look and see people, you get the best from them. And that is only the answer that we need moving forward, I think.
You mentioned an increase in death by suicide by 700% in central Alberta, but I think globally there's been comments that it's actually gone down during the pandemic. So where did you get those numbers, and what does that mean to you?
I haven't seen those numbers that it's went down. Any statistic that I've seen over certainly post-pandemic is certainly around the fact that disconnection has resulted in significant isolation. And I think what went down initially is child maltreatment numbers. And so if I've seen any data around that, initially it was like, we're connecting to people. But here's what's interesting. Calls to Child and Family Services have decreased in the beginning, but emergency room visits increased. Because what we lost is teacher access to our families, noticing, seeing, making calls, employing people to sort of support. The hope was when we reconnected with our families during the pandemic, we would regulate, and that happened quite nicely for the first 3 months. With a lack of skill to stay emotionally connected to each other, we got overwhelmingly dysregulated. Now, we used to be able to get filled up, That at the same time for the physical safety of our communities was taken away. So things like weddings and funerals and Wings with the Girls on Wednesday night, church on Sunday, hockey on Tuesday nights, those were the places that then if I could just have that fill up, yes, I would be so happy to spend more time with my people. But those were suspended for the physical safety of our communities as well at the same time, which then over the course of the pandemic saw a rise in emotionally dysregulated relationships, right? Which are things like child maltreatment and domestic violence, right? And so that's what I know to be true. And I think what happens then is we start to numb. When we feel ineffective in emotion with other people, particularly if we've let people down or we struggled in a relationship, we numb our emotions. The opposite of addiction, for example, is not sobriety, it's connection. Because when I take away, if you feel like a shitty dad or you're not very effective in your relationship or you don't really know how to tell somebody you love, and you can see that you hurt them because you don't have the skill to do that, it's easier if you come from multiple generations of abuse, neglect, and trauma. Intergenerational trauma is one of the biggest contributors to addiction, mental health struggles, because I don't have the skill. If nobody's ever given you the ability, if nobody's ever apologized to you, you can't give it away. If nobody's never been empathic towards you, you can't give it away. If nobody's ever looked at you and said, honey, this is how much you matter. You are so amazing to me. If nobody's ever done that to you, you can't give it to anybody else. So that's the cost of intergenerational trauma, because I cannot fix if I don't have anybody to give it to me. And when we become more disconnected, the issue is how do we then repair that? And the answer to me is we do it on purpose. We have conversations like this. We understand that actually you and me have everything we absolutely need. That today when we go and look people in the eye or shake somebody's hand or give them a compliment or buy a coffee in the lineup behind us or simply wave in our community at the stop sign, you will engage people in regulating their emotion, in looking and seeing again and not feeling so disconnected. That's what saves the world.
Does another step in saving the world also look like us being more comfortable with mental health professionals and actually going to see someone?
Oh my God, yes, that would be ideal.
And supporting people who need to see someone?
Debunking the stigma of mental health will not be accomplished in our lifetime. And I think sometimes we feel like I mean, that's what I live to do every single day. It gets so overwhelming for people that they just don't understand it, so they pull away. So the pressure is off. We don't have to debunk it, but it is exactly what needs to happen. And the only way we do it is one step at a time. There is no senior leader, no policy change, no massive intervention of mental health dollars that's going to change it. It's up to you and me to do the next best right kind thing. To look at our people, to start those conversations around our kitchen table, to be very aware with our kids, to, go for drives, stop in there, at bedtime, be able to coach the kid in hockey and know the one sitting in the corner. It's next best right kind thing. That if anybody's listening today, do not underestimate your power to do that in your community. Nobody else is responsible for this. No premier, no prime minister, no CEO, no president. It's you and me showing up today in our communities. And if anybody knows how to do it, it's people in AG.
You are a huge proponent of showing up in person. During the pandemic, that wasn't really possible, and sometimes our people are eons away.
Yeah.
Does technology offer us some support in this, even if it is the next best thing?
Yes. Oh my gosh. If I just think about, so technological advances in our lifetime has been massive, and technology is not the problem. It's how we use it that is amazing. I hope in my lifetime, because of technological advances, there's a cure for pancreatic cancer. I hope that, while I'm on the road doing this thing that I love so much, I get to FaceTime with my kids every night, right? I would not be able to do this the way that I do it if I couldn't stay connected to my family. Technological advances isn't the problem, it's how we use it. So things like being very conscious. If you have to handle a Zoom meeting, you turn your camera on. If you have to handle a Zoom meeting, you get the camera up at your eye level, and you have the light in front of you, not behind you, because I want your people, your family, to see. In the beginning of the pandemic, we saw a lot of nostrils, a lot of ears. My father, is this on? I love that, yeah. And we're getting more and more comfortable with this. And what I want you to think about, if you're running teams or organizations, it is jump on the Zoom call. But I'd love to have your cameras on. I'd love to see you today. Let's see what, it allows then for them to see you and you to see them. That is so critically important. And so again, I think the issue isn't about, email is sort of not meant for conversation. It's meant for an initial connection. Can we do the hard talks on Zoom? On the phone is better than a text message. An email is better than a text message. A phone call is better than an email. But if you can get on face-to-face, even if it's Zoom, most importantly, if you could get up and walk to the next guy's office or drive over and see each other, it changes. Our physiology changes when we're in the same room with each other. If I would have done the talk today on Zoom, which I did for 2.5 years, it would have been okay. There's not the same physiological change in our bodies that happen on Zoom. You can't replicate it to the same degree. Our cortisol drops, our oxytocin and our dopamine increase. You cannot replicate that. Although it's better than nothing, you cannot replicate on an instrument the same way that you can in person.
We talked about family and how you can connect with family or kids that you're coaching. What about your colleagues? If we see that they're dysregulated, is it all the same across the board? Colleagues, family, friends, strangers?
100%. And this is what's really interesting. I speak across industry. So this past 3 months, I've been at the helm of the Canadian Funeral Association, Farm Credit Canada, teachers, police officers, and bus drivers. So my slide deck never changes. It's the same conversation again and again. Sometimes I have better cow jokes or teacher jokes or police officer jokes. It's all the same. We are wired to do it. We never outgrow it. And it is probably the biggest superpower you have to know that if you connect to somebody else, you're not, especially today, might not only change your life, you could save it.
A phrase I've seen you reference a lot is you can't address what you don't acknowledge. I'd be remiss if I didn't talk to you about this because it came up in the news. In September of last year, the College of Alberta Psychologists Hearing Tribunal found you guilty of unprofessional conduct. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah. So here's what's interesting. In this industry, there's a lot of, in the industry that I work in psychology, there's a lot of conversations around doing work with dysregulated people. And I think that the job of the college is when there is that emotional dysregulation that happens, you have the ability to protect the public. And so in this particular case, I had seen this woman for 5 years, and now that it is public, I can disclose some aspects of the case we couldn't for a long time. But there was significant emotional dysregulation, and when we attempted to put limits on that, that wasn't okay. And so there was lots of conversations about how we keep her safe. And the suggestion was, let's make a complaint to the college, because if I can't do that, if we can't continue to do this work, let's do it. And so in working with the college, we agreed, yep, here's all of the things that needed to be put in place to help you regulate your emotion. And all of these things weren't done to the best of my ability. And it was probably one of the biggest lessons ever for me as a professional, knowing that we're all in a place of serving other people, that we're not going to get it right sometimes, that we should be always sort of diligent about how we connect to other people. And in that particular case, I've talked to the college many times about how do we protect ourselves in this industry where we serve emotionally dysregulated people. Is it going to be hard? Is it easier not to? And that's often where so many of us land. Okay, then forget it. Then we're not going to do this work, or we're not going to, this is too hard. We pull away. And in this particular case, I've talked to many of my colleagues about it's incredibly important to continue to show up to the best of our abilities, that we make calls in the moment that we think is going to serve an industry. And that's exactly what I've done. And I said to the college, again, I would never do anything different, because when people are emotionally dysregulated, sometimes we need to meet them where they're at. But I understand fully that sometimes that isn't perceived the way it was intended. So I'm very grateful for the college. They do their job well of protecting the public. And in this incident, in this isolated incident, I certainly as a professional learned a ton from it. And it's those lessons come hard, but they're important.
But you said you wouldn't change anything, but in the letter it said that that you'd received gifts and used some name calling. Like I don't mean that negatively. Like I think positive name calling or references, but you wouldn't change any of that.
You know what? I think sometimes in order to establish relationship by the ethical code, should you receive gifts? Gifts in this particular case was cookies that she would bake at the beginning of every session, and that's how we established in the beginning. Would it be okay if I brought cookies? Absolutely. So in retrospect, in this particular case, would I have changed anything? I don't think I would have in the beginning. And this is what I said to the college. Yes, it was, by the letter of the law, a guilty, yes, we're not supposed to do that. But in this case, in order to help this woman regulate, this was the best call at that time. And the other, I think, thing that was named in the complaint was accepting photographs. And here's what's interesting about this. When she, in this particular case, which happens many times, is dysregulated. We were away on a family vacation. And I said, yes, here's where we are. This is where we are. And on my social media platform, it comes out all the time. And so in my call in that moment, it was, yes, I needed to regulate her to let her know that indeed we were on holidays. I wasn't not available because I didn't want to be for her. Here's where it was. So when we sit in front of the college, is this appropriate? Okay, I understand how this doesn't meet the criteria for you. So absolutely, thank you for pointing this out, how the perception was this way. I agree. Let me be better in this way.
And perhaps like the continuity of care was a little bit lacking as well.
So that was the other question. So after 5 years of seeing this woman, then the question was, can I then terminate this to say, here's how I'd like to care for you in this moment. I think that this is not further healthy for you or for me to be able to provide this. Here's the 3 options in which you can continue. She didn't want to receive those options, and the college's position was I needed to be better at setting her up with continued care. So they were right again. Absolutely, I could have done a better job in setting her up for continued care. And so that was another lesson that I said, absolutely. Okay, thank you.
Is it a hard thing for all of us? I imagine speaking about connection, but then also keeping professional boundaries.
Yeah.
We run into that all the time.
Don't we? And I think it's the thing, and I'm so grateful that, as hard as this has been for me personally, certainly for my team, the explanation was not provided in the media. So CTV to this day, didn't reach out for comment, didn't sort of provide the context in which the case occurred, which is really their responsibility, but also their right to publish it because it's a public record. But the idea, I think, so much of what we sort of misunderstand sometimes is that intention and perception are two very different things. And how do we continue to stay connected? It makes it really difficult when you see a headline or when you report a headline. And I think it's important. The college has a job, and we also have a job. And so we've done our best to openly answer any questions and have conversations like this, because I think we always, in this world of serving humans or being in this place of a human services profession, will always make mistakes. We will always need to learn or grow or be better. And I think that's the thing that I'm most grateful for in this process, is that this has been the single most important teacher around how sometimes connection requires us to sort of play very clearly on boundaries and being really clear up front about what that looks like and what that means, but also stay authentically connected. It will be a thing that I will never get right. I will constantly learn in this profession, in this speaking world, in the things that I do and show up for people, that I think across industry, we work every day to get right. And this certainly was no exception.
And I think it's hard, we're at a conference, there's a lot of handshaking, and when you came in the room I said, oh, we're handshaking, because everybody has different boundaries professionally. You see some people hugging and they're friends, but maybe they're also colleagues. How do we, on a day-to-day basis where you don't have those professional boundary conversations at the start, how do we manage that all?
I think sometimes, so two things. I think we get a little bit, part of our job is to stay engaged with people. And I think, in terms of being healthy in our organizations or our systems, but I think it's more now than ever, we can judge, we're much better able to sort of address our concerns if we show up in person, if we have those hard conversations, if we sort of say, as I walked in the room today, you're like, oh, we're doing this, right? And the question is, okay, is it all right by you? Right? Because I think we sometimes make assumptions that it would be, and in an effort to, of course we would shake hands. That would be customary, typically in our culture, that we would do that. Now, given these past 2 years, are we more conscious of checking in on that? If you come from a massive trauma history, maybe this isn't something that's going to be comfortable for you. So much of this will never change about how we read each other's behaviors, but the less we look at each other, the less we connect to each other, the less opportunity we have to learn those nuances of social interaction that is going to be necessary to keep us alive.
And we can just ask. We can just use our words.
You can. Yeah.
If you had a message, something for the people of this room to take home and for people who weren't here to take home, what would that be?
I think that just really never underestimate your power, that we are all in this place of really, I think, trying to make sure that we're getting it right, trying to do our best, whatever that looks like, and never underestimate your power, right? Just to look and see, to buy a coffee for somebody, to give them a compliment, to do those little things, because I think right now we need you more than ever.
Dr. Carrington, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.